further ado, Noelle Mering.
Thank you. Thank you so much, JP, and thanks all of you for having me. What a great group you all are. So grateful to be here, especially on a first Friday. I heard a story recently about a fantastic thinker, I think a really important author that you're probably acquainted with, but if you're not, you might want to be. His name is Viktor Frankl, and he was a Jewish thinker, psychologist, philosopher, living in Vienna, Austria, as the Nazi persecutions were starting. And in 1938, he became accepted he got a lottery that went through to come to the United States, and he had a passport, he had a visa, and he had a school he was going to start. He was a really prescient thinker on psychological and philosophical matters, and he was spearheading something called logotherapy. So he had a choice to make. He was able to go to the States, which was fantastic, but the Nazi persecutions were just beginning, and he realized he could not bring his family. It was only him who could come. So he went home, or he went to pray in a Catholic church. He actually was a Jewish man, but he, for some reason, went to pray in a Catholic church for about an hour, and then went home, and his father was there. And he explained this to his father, I think, and he noticed some big weird hunk of piece of marble in the kitchen. And he said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, that our temple, that was destroyed by the Nazis, I went and salvaged this one piece. I just grabbed a piece to bring home." And so they looked at it and they said, "What does it say on it?" And it was in Hebrew. And so they discerned and realized it said, it was the fourth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, which is the only commandment actually that carries with it a promise or perhaps a reason. Honor thy father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. Beautiful. The work I tend to do is oriented around family and ideology. Certainly theology of home is about restoring the dignity and importance of domesticity, that our hidden lives and our homes are actually really important, and the modern tendency to invert our priorities and make our public lives preeminent and our private lives less preeminent is really destructive, an inversion, I think a demonic inversion of what ought to be. Because ultimately, it's not just targeting our home life, it's targeting our interior life of our soul. So in reorienting ourselves to root ourselves from the least visible to the most visible is the way we stabilize ourselves and our families and the people, our communities, and by extension, our country, and eventually our world and our church. So the work there is about the family and the hidden life, and then Awake Not Woke, which I wrote in 2020. I think I started writing that book 2 weeks before the quarantine began, and then a couple months before the George Floyd riots began. And it was a wild time in 6 months to be writing a book while you see it all unfolding in the streets around you. So that brought in the ideology. And I had just been thinking and praying about, what should I be doing with my time next to build on all this. And meanwhile, I've been going around the country talking mostly about the woke movement. And at every Q&A, there was one consistent comment question that I would get over the last 4 years, which is a parent or grandparent standing up and saying, my grown child or my grandchildren have left the faith, they've gotten woke, they can barely tolerate me, they find me and everything I raised them to believe to be rather offensive. They're either estranged from me now or our relationship is sort of teetering on the verge of estrangement. And I just started realizing this pattern and just seeing, there's this sea of very heartbroken people who are kind of grappling with this. And it came to realize, this is, I think, the next point of attack on the family. So the family is a perennial target of ideology because the family stabilizes us. It gives us a rooting in the past. It points us towards a purpose in the future. And revolutions thrive not on stability, but on instability. And so if you really want to destabilize a community or a country, you really want to target the family because it keeps you strong and it is a buffer against ideology. Ideology preys on people being isolated and anxious. Isolation and anxiety are the ways that you can control people more easily. And so, of course, the family is a buffer for both of those things. It's a community, it's intimacy, an intimate community where you see people's faults very well and you strive to love them anyway, which is a beautiful way to receive love and to give love. But it also is a buffer against anxiety because if you're in community with other people, if you have a history and a lineage, and you see that you come amongst a line of ancestry, and that there's going to be people who come after you as well, you feel like you're a little bit smaller in a way that disposes you towards an awe and a reverence that can incline you towards God Himself. And that sense of wonder. And that sense of wonder, actually, paradoxically, the fear of God frees you from the fear of everything else. But when we lose our fear of God, of course, we become utterly crippled by the fear of everything. Fear of loss of our life, fear of loss of our livelihoods, of human respect, things that are naturally fearful. But in context of a proper fear of God, we can be freed of that crippling sort of fear of those things. So the family is incredibly important for all those reasons. And while I think there have been so many attacks on the family in various forms, the ideology tends to sort of, if you can anthropomorphize it, pivot. Once it realizes one attack is being seen through, and then present itself through another lens, another form of attack. And so I do think that this is the next, the newest way of attacking the family is what's called the no contact movement. So it's mostly Gen Z, and they tend to write off their parents. It tends to be directed towards their parents, parental estrangement or no contact. And it's confusing because there's always been times in which family members have become estranged from one another. Abuse, physical, sexual abuse, mental illness, divorce, addictions. There's always been plenty of reasons why people might have to, in a healthy way, kind of take a step back, create boundaries, maybe say, we can't be in a relationship for now. Even like in older, more ancient times, there are people who would be banished from communities. Sometimes for the sake of danger, that they develop vicious habits and they were a threat to the community, or maybe for heresy or something like that. So what we're seeing now is a break from sort of that sort of historical type of estrangement, which was for the sake of preserving a common cultural memory, with the idea that we have to kind of let someone go or imprison them or banish them or protect ourselves from them because they are a threat to a common cultural memory and a cultural stability. And it was generally directed from the olders to the younger. And so this is different because it is not for the sake of preserving a common memory, but to interrupt it. It's for the sake of forgetting what has come before us and separating ourselves from it so that we might reinvent, reauthor, and re-engineer what is to come next. And it also is an inversion in that it tends to be from the young, originate in the younger, directed towards the older. So if there is a historical precedent for it, it would be more akin to something like Maoist China, in which authoritarian dictators would say that we have to get rid of everything that's old ideas, old religion, old culture, old traditions. And so they would incentivize the young school kids to denounce their parents publicly and relentlessly. In so far doing, you allow the tyrant then to become take the place of the father, take the place not only of the father, but to take the place of any religion or any rival to his own authority, so that because he is an authoritarian. True authority is in line with things that are truly also authoritative, not just their own, not in desperate preservation of their own power. So that's the historical precedent for it. It tends to happen over three common causes. The three reasons most kids do give when they are cutting someone off, not for those old, more understandable reasons of abuse, addiction, and mental illness. Now it's political. So I call it the politics of estrangement. So the three most common reasons that Gen Z kids would do this are one, vaccine, COVID stuff. Two, you voted for Donald Trump or somebody who's Republican conservative. And three, gender ideology. So I'll give you a quick little story that are true to life for each example of each one. I've interviewed a couple of families where the parents or the siblings were not going to get the shot, and this is not about whether litigating the shot. This is just about the family dynamics here. And the child was getting married and said, you can't come to my wedding unless you get this. And the parents said, we will test multiple times, we'll isolate for 10 days before, X, Y, Z, and no go. You're choosing this belief over my wedding, myself, my bride, and so cut them off. An example of voting booth estrangement would be another family who actually had both. This family, it's a woman, she's now a widow, mother of 6 and several grandchildren, and the son, who had become rather captured by ideology, he came home, drove a long distance to visit his father, who was actively dying of a terrible cancer. And he found out when he came home that though his parents had gotten the shot, a couple of his siblings had not, and he isolated himself and then left immediately the next day. And the father said, I'm worried I'm never going to see him again. And the mother expressed that to him, and he said, that's a risk I'm going to take because of the decisions you all have made. And then later, they kind of reconciled after that. He came to the funeral, came to be with the family at various times, and then after 2024, they never talked about politics around him because they knew they had differences, but the son knew the family was pro-life, and so he had a suspicion they might have voted red. And so he posts something on social media saying, I'm so angry now that the election went this way. I've been up all night and I want to call my family and scream at them. And so then the mother is in mass and she actually gets a call as she's walking out and she sees it says him, and she'd seen a social media post and she said, oh no, but I'm not going to not take a call from my child. So she answered and it didn't go well. And finally, she really, he just said, you shouldn't have voted. She said, it's not that I care that much about this particular person. It's just that I'm pro-life, and I think this is the pro-life vote. And he said, well, you should never have voted. I can't, we can no longer be in relationship anymore. And she said, I love you. And he said, I love you. Goodbye. And they haven't spoken since. It's really sad. And then the third one, the gender ideology. This is actually probably the most common one in a way, and I think it's the one that most inclines someone to go no contact. So one example is a father who was really a deep, profound thinker, but his daughter got really captured socially by gender stuff, and she had some mental stuff happening too, and I think this was a way for her to translate her struggles into a new identity that might be able to kind of reinvent herself. And so she first said, I'm bi, then I'm non-binary, and then I'm going to transition. And the parents were trying to give pushback and didn't know exactly how to do it. And finally, she said, I have a new chosen family. I'm going to be with them. They're my friends. They're the ones who accept me. And the interesting thing is that even the parents who try to affirm as much as possible and try to accompany them along this way and try not to let their beliefs get in the way, tend to eventually get rejected by the child because the pronouns, all of that stuff is always evolving. You can't really stay up to date on it, and you're going to misstep at some point, or it's going to go so far that you can no longer accompany them. At some point, they tend to turn away from the parent. And I realize there's a symbolic reason for that too, which is that the parental memory is long. I remember my kids when they were 1, when they were 2. They don't remember themselves at 1 or 2. And so insofar as the parent has that sort of memory and the child knows that the parent has that memory, they are an existential reminder of an identity that just won't die. And so a parent is always going to be threatened in this sort of deeply violent kind of revolutionary sort of gender ideology. So those are examples of the given reasons for going no contact with the parents. But there's deeper things that are driving it, I think, and I'll just talk about 3 and then maybe conclude with some positive things, and then we can do Q&A. But the deeper things that are happening, one is I think there's a real psychological reason for division. And some of that I don't mean in an academic way, I mean in a popular way. So there's a rise in something called therapy speak, where people very casually now will call people narcissists, or I'll hear my daughter and her friends will talk about taking the CLT exam, being like, oh, this is literal trauma, just very casually using all these therapeutic language to describe normal kind of life discomfort or conflict. And I think there's a couple reasons why there's a rise in therapy speak. One is that I think we do actually have a rise in cases of narcissism. A lot of that is a result of the breakdown of family bonds, where people feel that sort of insecurity and they kind of mask it in different ways and can develop a personality disorder in some ways. So, in some ways, maybe we have more talk of it because there is some more of it. But I also think that there's just a very online presence pushing this type of thing regularly and overwhelmingly. So I've done some research on an app called TikTok, which probably most of you are not on, and that's the right decision to not be on it. But on TikTok, there's what I call TikTok psychologists, and they have all these popular hashtags with millions of views. There'll be hashtag toxic parents, hashtag narcissistic parents, hashtag, I don't know, toxic family. And there's just these little videos of all these people saying, I used to be really unhappy. I had my parents, they just kept putting me in this role when I was a kid, and I didn't feel like they were really always there for me. And now I'm free from them. I finally went no contact. Hashtag no contact. And now I have my chosen family, the people who really know me and love me. I'm, brave and beautiful and wonderful. And it oftentimes they'll give sort of surveys of how you can tell if you also need to go no contact. And the surveys are really ambiguous. They could be interpreted in different ways depending on how you're choosing to frame your perspective and your memory. So I took one, had several of my girlfriends take one, and the questions were things like, were your parents not there for you in an important moment when you needed them? Or did they try to impress people around them, that strangers or friends, more than they focused on it, giving you attention in that moment? And I immediately thought of, there's this funny video a comedian does about what moms are like when they're on their phone with their girlfriends, when their kids approach them. And it's this woman who's on the phone and she's speaking, friendly in a lilting, fun voice, and really locked in on her friend. And then her kid comes up and she's like, mouthing to him angrily that she's on the phone. And I thought, you can even look at, which all of us relate to, because my mom did that, I probably have done that to my kids, but you can look back on that sort of memory and reframe it as, gosh, my mom prioritized her friends instead of me. I was right there. You can reframe anything in that way. Another example of how this mentality gets driven into kids is something called social emotional learning, SEL, which is pretty ubiquitous in K through 12 schools now. But they have some programs oriented around, or curriculum directed towards 5th through 8th graders. And I was going through all of these for research, what the questions are, and what the programs are, what the activities are. And there's this one that caught my eye. It's called Problem Diary. And the kids are to daily log their trigger situations. So what happened today? Did somebody make you feel like you weren't included today? Or who treated you unfairly today? Or were your parents not there for you in an important moment today? And I thought, these questions could be appropriate for a child who's really gone through trauma. But in assuming that all kids are in a place of trauma, you're actually inviting them to find trauma that might not be there. Abigail Schreier writes about that in Bad Therapy. It's called the iatrogenic effect. But then I contrasted that in my mind, thinking about this with what we do at the dinner table as a family. What you probably did with your kids and what I did with mine. You sat around the table and daily said, did you include that new student at lunch today? Were you helpful in your classroom today? Did you help out your sibling today? In other words, the family is inviting the child to not obsess over his own hurts and weaknesses and wants, but to actually slowly coax them out of themselves to think of someone else and to be service-oriented. That's the natural and appropriate progression from childhood into maturity. But the school is doing something the opposite. It's saying, what happens at the family dinner table is sort of like an examination of conscience. The church asks us to daily examine our conscience, do a mea culpa, go to confession, inviting us gently to see outside of ourselves and outside of our own hurts and wants, and how we might be failing someone else or be able to grow in generosity. And what the school is doing is a reverse examination of conscience. The school is saying, I want you to examine everyone else's conscience and find how they might have hurt you. And this is an inversion for a reason, right? Because it's really spiritually deforming kids. You're teaching them to scan their environment for grievances. You're teaching them to become not only a victim, but also accuser. And I think that there's, obviously a spiritual connection there. And in some ways, I think it's understandable because a lot of kids feel really unsteady, unstable, and probably like victims. I think we've given kids and young adults two opposing messages about their identity that is really leaving them in an unstable spot. One is we've told kids, raised a generation of kids to say, you have total autonomy. You have complete power. You can make anything mean what you want it to mean. What you do with your body in intimacy can mean anything. Marriage, that can mean anything. Your body can mean anything. Your identity can mean anything, even in defiance of bodily reality. You have this godlike power to create your own meaning. At the same time, we've told them, you have no internal locus of control. Everything that happens in your life is caused by something outside of you in two ways, I think. One, because there are systemic forces that are above and beyond us, and so our failures and our successes in life are not really attributable to us or our choices or our efforts or our neglect. They are attributable to the oppression that surrounds us or the oppression that is within us. You succeed based on your privilege, and you fail based on the oppression of the people around you. And so that's telling kids you can't actually change anything. You can only maybe blow up the system, but you can't make decisions in your own life with agency and internal locus of control to improve, nor can you learn from the ways that you have failed. So that's one way. The second way we have given them an external locus of control is through gender identity. We've told kids, okay, someone can actually eradicate your existence if they don't affirm your identity. That's how unstable and fragile your existence is. That transgender movement will call it a genocide if there's laws passed that in any way limit their ability to access gender-affirming care, mutilation, and cross-hormone drugs, cross-gender drugs. And think about how unstable and scary that would feel if you're a kid. I just was reading the story about this 13-year-old kid whose parents have indulged or affirmed, I think abused her basically to confirm that she's actually in the wrong body. And she was telling this reporter, am I gonna die? I think I'm gonna die because this person won office. And now we have to flee to a blue state because I might not be able to get the drugs I need. Sorry, she was not 13, she was 11. But think about how scary that feels. It's like that 11-year-old probably feels like she's surrounded by would-be assassins. And you can lock your door, you can have police protection, but in a digital age, you can be accessed by anyone online without even breaking into a room. And they can misgender you, mispronoun you, dead name you, and you are eradicated. So we've given these kids this cognitive dissonance, telling them they have all the power in the world that they don't actually have power over, and that they have zero power over things that they actually do and ought to have some power over. So I think they feel unstable for a very, very good reason. Okay, I would also say that there's, there's something really appealing, I think, for the younger generation about identifying their wounds. I think it's similar to confession. Where in a time when you feel this total autonomy, you want to actually acknowledge that you're actually vulnerable. And I think identifying and confessing our wounds and our hurts and the way we might be injured feels sort of like a spiritual experience when you're sort of living without God. So I think that's another dynamic. Okay, the second one is, the second driver is chosen families. So chosen families is a very popular phrase on these platforms. Chosen families, found families. And chosen families originated in the LGBTQ movement. A group of men would all move, to San Francisco, and they would get a house, and then there would be the mother and the father, and we were all siblings, and they're creating their own, this idea that we can create our own family. So it's a way of demythologizing the family. And there's a common script in these no-contact groups where they'll say, you feel bad cutting off your parents, but that's just because you've been taught, it's a social construct to think that family matters. You just have to undo that. You have to unlearn that. You choose your family. And I think one of the funny things about this is that if you think about, there's a truth there, right? That when my kids would have a friend over, I'd say, include your younger sibling, and they'd be like, oh, I just want to hang out with my friend, because they chose their friend. I didn't choose my annoying little sister or whatever. But love is actually encouraging people, all of us, to choose what we did not choose. When we get a cross in our life, when we're suffering, choose what you did not choose. Will the suffering that's been given to you. And will the person who is given to you, even married couples, you chose your spouse at one point, but oftentimes you'll talk to a married couple, after years and years, things have grown stale, or maybe there's conflict, and I don't know why I chose this person. And the magic of relationships and love is, the richness of relationships is actually choosing them again, choosing them over and over again. Relationships that are built only on choice and no givenness are unstable. And relationships that are built only on givenness and duty and no choice are impersonal. We need both. And I think that the chosen family is another elevation of autonomy that is built to make us forget. And the irony, too, is that, there's, I read this interesting article by a 50-something-year-old man who bought into the chosen family thing. He said, the funny thing is, chosen families are for people who are young and attractive and have money. I'm getting old, I'm getting infirm, I'm not so attractive anymore, I've kind of lost a lot of my money. People aren't just flocking to choose me. But when I was 24, yeah, we were flocking to choose each other, it sounded great. You need, as you age, you get more vulnerable, you need the givenness. You need people who have duties towards you. Okay, thirdly, the third driver of this, and it's like part of the script as well, is what I call the infallibility narrative. And that is, there's a common belief in these communities that the person who goes no contact, you can never question them. You have to assume that they have tried every recourse and that no one would have made this decision without a valid reason, so how dare you even question their decision? Which is really weird, right? Because anytime you've made a decision and you're, wounded or that's hard and there's very emotional, you actually oftentimes don't see things clearly. You need someone to give you information. You need pushback. You need to be helped in your prudence. But then the other fallout is that any other family member, and this is promoted by several therapists as well, who are part of the no contact movement. They'll say if any family members give you pushback and say, maybe you should talk to your mom again, maybe you should talk to your dad again, that's a sign that they are toxic too. You can cut them off too. And this is a sort of self-rejection that I think it becomes a family rejection, because rejecting your parents is a way of self-rejection too. I think that we're seeing this now. It is a movement of not only social, sort of a symbolic suicide or self-harm, that the people you come from, your origin itself is toxic, and cutting yourself off from it is not that different philosophically from cutting off your bodily members, from cutting off, from the divorce culture, from, all of these things. They're all about pulling apart things that should be held together. Separating sex from marriage, separating men from women, separating mother from child, separating child from parent. And if you think about it, this is the mirror image of the abortion movement, where the abortion movement is cutting off and stopping what's to come next, the future. This is cutting off and stopping what's come before us. And so we're orphaning. It's a generation of orphans, understandably anxious, fearful, and prone to see others as threats to themselves. And I think part of, and I'm going to wrap up soon so we can get to Q&A, but part of, I think, what's happened is, do you know a phrase called the Overton window? Is that a phrase that people know? Yeah. Okay, so the Overton window was started by a man at a think tank, Joseph Overton, in the 90s. And he basically said, there's a window of ideas that are politically possible, but you have to persuade people to shift the window if you want to move policy in a certain direction. So for example, he would say, 100 years ago, no one thought that women should be able to vote. But now you couldn't even run for dog catcher if you ran on a platform that women can't vote. Not just because the Overton window shifted. And he didn't say it's good or bad. He just said this is politically how reality works. And I think what's happened is that we have changed the Overton window metaphysically. It's not just that it shifted extremely left or something. It's that it actually changed in a deeper way, where it's become not a window but a cage. And I think people feel that the threats of bad beliefs have actually been the threats of people who are not just unenlightened, but are actually lurking as predators in the dark, trying to harm the people in the light. And so they imprison themselves in this prison of ideology in order to protect themselves, not from bad ideas, but from the bad people who espouse them. And so that leads to a really toxic and polarized culture. And for many reasons, which we can get into more in Q&A if you guys have questions about that. But it also leads to a purity culture. This former very regressive social justice warrior I was reading had a great statement the other day, and this is a broad statement. There are all sorts of distinctions and nuances, but I think in generally it's helpful to explain something. And what she said is, and she's still very leftist, she said, the right looks for converts, the left looks for traitors. And she describes her experience at which she was in this very progressive activist revolutionary culture. She was constantly afraid of being cast out, that she wouldn't be progressive enough, that she wouldn't be enlightened enough, that she might read the wrong person or say the wrong thing or talk to or become friends with the wrong person. So there's this instinct to never let the progressive movement progress beyond you. And I think that makes sense as well, because if you are building your movement on revolution and progression, you don't want to be the last one and into the future. If we're trying to be on the right side of history, you want to hasten that history. So you want to push the envelope and push the boundaries and be at the forefront of that, and express no sort of mercy towards the people who have come before you or you've left behind. So obviously there's several consequences of this, is exacerbating of the social loneliness and isolation epidemic that we have. It's also, I think, leads to a certain sterility. If you're a young adult who has embraced this way of thinking, you don't want to move into the category of the people who are on the side of oppression, parenthood. And so I think a lot of young adults, rightfully or understandably, are not attracted to becoming mothers and fathers, in part, well, for a lot of reasons, but in part because of this. Because the philosophy is, I didn't ask to be born, you chose to have me, and so you owe me, I don't owe you. This is a common, I read this all the time in these forums. And the implication is, my life is not a blessing or something for me to be grateful for. My life is a burden, and you did it to me, you inflicted it upon me. So loneliness, also sterility, and obviously this is deeply crippling for the country. If I cannot filter normal disagreement and discomfort and the inevitable awkwardness of family lives with disagreements and arguments, if I can't filter that through love and reconciliation, I'm not going to be able to do that with the people down the street, the people across town, the people across the state, and people across the country. And so they all go together, family, the faith, and the flag. They all go together, but if you really get at the family, you get at everything else. Filial piety leads to spiritual piety, and also it leads to our patriotism. So what do we do? I think that for one thing, I think identifying dynamics that are built on lies is really important, and sort of the thing that I most spend my time on. Is that I'm very convinced that if we can expose the deeper meanings behind these sorts of things, it helps to defeat them. You shed light on this type of thing, it really can't stand up to scrutiny because it's built on really toxic ideas. But I think oftentimes we're afraid to talk about them because we don't want to litigate anyone's particular experience. Somebody might have cut their parents off for a very good reason. We don't make them feel uncomfortable or make them feel like they're being swept up in this ideological movement that they were not part of, that they just truly made a good decision. But I don't think that sort of worry about offending a particular person is warranted. I think that most people understand that we can make distinctions and are willing to do it, especially if they have a healthy, ordered mindset. So, and it's too important to talk about such a movement when it's happening, so that parents can be equipped on how to identify it and to defeat it as well. So, for one thing, I think we just need that sort of awareness. I'm also, trying to do more work on, how we get out of the schools and also online. A colleague of mine at EPPC just wrote a new book called The Tech Exit, helping parents, particularly state laws and policies to shift so that kids need parental permission if they're underage to get on certain apps. So at least parents can be aware whether or not they're doing it, and there's different gatekeeping ways that she's and some other legislators have come up with. But I think getting hold of tech is going to be really important. But I think also we have to understand this is deeply spiritual. So, I don't know if people in the room are going through this, or if this is something that you have friends that are going through. But I would encourage them first and foremost that one of the best things we can do is obviously building up our interior life of prayer, which I think probably no one in this room probably is not doing, since you're all obviously devoted to the Sacred Heart. But to not forget that that our best efforts are expended there. Oftentimes parents will say, I spend a long time trying to keep in contact with my kid and convince them and persuade them, and they keep telling me, I'm going to have to block you, or at some point the kids understand what you believe, and that's not going to change their minds. They need to be prayed for. They need somebody else to come into their life and to convince them. They need someone else to be a vessel or a vehicle for our Lord. And one of the signs of hope I see, and then I'll take Q&A, is this last Easter we had more adults coming into the Catholic Church worldwide than I think we have maybe ever. UK, amen. United Kingdom, in France, in the United States, bustling. And I had a sense this was happening, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, you just see it. Okay, this is real. A lot of us have been sensing this was happening. So I think something really fascinating is happening with Gen Z, where they're sorting. They're either sorting into this sort of severance kind of category of hyper no mercy and all militancy, or they're sorting into this man's search for meaning. They're sorting into looking for the cross. They're sorting into looking for the sacraments and looking for an interior life of the soul and looking for domesticity and looking for true love and meaning. And two things, that group of kids, we need to avail ourselves of them for mentorship. Because oftentimes it can be a reaction, and reactions need to become substantive. So we don't want people just on a pendulum, reacting to, okay, I've been raised with this horrific nihilistic culture, I'm just going to swing over to Catholicism or what have you. they need formation. So we need to make sure that we're putting ourselves out there to form other people. But the other thing I think is that's really hopeful is that they are then the peers of the kids who are over here. And so they're going to have access to their coworkers, to their neighbors, to their friendships. They're going to be intermingling with all the kids that have been captured by ideology. And they're going to, through natural friendship and through their prayer life, hopefully, bring these kids back to meaning. Man searches for meaning for good reason, because we are not made to not have it. And so I think that both those things give me a lot of hope. So I would encourage you all to be purposeful, to be mentoring people where you can, to be befriending and hospitably inviting people in, and also for the younger people, to be thinking of your life with an eye towards mission. Who you marry, who you befriend, where you work, wherever you are, God has placed you there. And so look around you and see who's next to you, invite them over, and then point them up. Thank you so much.